Right, this Prism. It's you've got two small screws here. Hold that clamping plate piece in place. They serve to hold the assembly together while it's off the camera. See that prism? That's terrible. I'm looking at the screen. To be honest, that is extremely clean. It's at least as clean as I would ever hope to be able to get one, and so I'm not going to disturb that. I'll remove the mask at the back here with the viewfinder eyepiece. Let's blow any dust loose from there. This prism is ruined. I've rarely seen a prism as bad as that. I don't know you'll ever be able to see any of that on the camera really, but that you can see through it. It just hasn't got any silver at all to speak of. Let's take the bracket off it. That is one useless lump of glass. A new prism will be wanted, I think. Now I'm just looking at the state of these rubber pads where it bears on that prism, and I can see that there's a little bit of paint there where it's stuck to the prism previously. I'm concerned that they will be high spots that will mark the new prism. So I'm just rubbing this with a bit of naphtha to remove those little bits of paint, so that we've just got nice clean pads pressing on the new prism when I put it in place. And that may help the new prism, which of course is not going to be very new either. It's going to be about the same age as the camera, but it's a new old stock parts. It may give that a working chance of surviving for another few decades. All these marks that you see here, zoom in a bit, all these yellowish marks here, that's adhesive from the tape. Originally it would have had a black plastic tape around there which would have sealed the prism to this to a certain extent, and it's basically designed to keep dust out. That's all it was required to do. It wasn't for light leaks or anything like that, it was to keep the dust out. Now I've got to find a prism. So here I have a new old stock prism, and I'm just going to make sure that the two glass surfaces that we're interested in are clean. There's quite a distinct circle on the back of that piece of glass, which is quite a distinct colour compared to the rest of it. I presume that that's an artefact of manufacture. Perhaps it's just where the prism had been in contact with its storage case, spare parts storage case, for decades. Let me just check my case. No, there's no circular feature there, so it wasn't on that. It's like a coating, like an optical coating. It's appears to be a different colour. It's nice. I see a tiny fleck on the surface of that condenser there. Let's just see if it'll lift off. That prism just sits down in that spot there. We can put that into the body. So the reflex mirror in this camera is in quite good condition as these things go. Let's just get this to just want to pull this arm back by partly cocking the shutter so I can get this prism into place. That's good. And now I've got to put some black tape around that to seal that, keep the dust out, unlike the last person in there who was stealing the prism. I'll go and find my tape. Right, I've got some tape. Normally I'll just cut off a big enough piece of tape to deal with, and then cut strips to get this prism sealed against dust ingress. That's all we're really doing. So with a couple of pairs of tweezers, I'll start on this face. To cut that edge so it'll roll around there easily. And trim off that front piece. That's one side. Now I need to do another side. It's best to cut these pieces longer than you need and trim them in place. It's easier when you've got room to manoeuvre them with your tweezers. Again, I'll want to trim that excess off at the back. Again, I need to make a little snip here so I can fold that edge down. And trim the excess off at the front. Now a piece across the front. It all appears good. I want a short piece across the back here. I'm not going to be too adventurous in trying to cover up that back edge where you can't really get to it. That would be a mug's game. I'd be there forever and I'd end up trimming most of it away after the event. That's good. And again, I'll trim the excess off that I don't need. Have tape in place. A clamp piece that holds the prism down firmly. I'll just lower that carefully into place. And I've got to find the holes to mount that through our tape. So I'm just piercing through the tape with my tweezers. And we'll have two large screws to go in there, nickel plated, and these screws I'll put in first, and then the small black ones you saw me remove earlier I'll put them in second. It's the first screw, using my tweezers to pierce through the tape and to align the hole, and I'll get the second screw in place. And these two screws do the bulk of the work of holding that prism and finder assembly firmly down in the body. Just checking that the shutter cocks and fires correctly, that nothing is fouling the mirror or the capping plate, or indeed this cocking rack at the back, but that all appears to be good. So our two small black screws go in here. Again, I've used the point of my tweezers to pierce through the tape. And the same on this side. And at the rear, we have this mask. Now that would have been held in with two screws, a larger diameter nickel plated screw and then a smaller black screw. And this nickel plated screw is probably the required one for that position. It looks suitably damaged. And I think I'd mentioned earlier when taking the camera apart that that screw had been scarred up. It certainly had. And then the small black screw. Check the alignment's good. Piercing the tape, that appears to be okay. See if we can get this screw in place. Appears to be going in okay. So our prism's in place. Well, I think we can just about test fit the top cover now and see how we get on. I've got my meter here. I'll clean the meter up and we'll put that in place. Well, with the meter, I don't need to do much to this. I just need to ensure a couple of things. One is it's likely to be a bit sticky under this cam, and if I remove the circlip that holds it, I can probably clean that. And I even found it. There you go. So that's probably a little bit sticky with old grease. And the other thing is the follower needle. This arm here moves the follower needle and you can see that it's very sluggish. And typically it's because at the pivot here any lubricant is dry and gooey. So we will put a tiny drop of oil there, and to get to it I've got to remove this top cover. So we've got two tiny screws which are painted over, and I'm going to just scrape down that screw slot with my scalpel so that I can get my screwdriver in there and turn it, and the same at the other side. The follower needle moves back under spring tension, so if this is unusually sticky, you may think that you've got your settings correct when you're reading your meter, but the needle may not have followed the settings wheel, and so maybe giving you a false impression, and you could easily be well out with your exposure. Of course, we don't know that the meter's accurate at this stage. It may well be that it's not. But at least we can have a fighting chance of a useful meter if we get everything sorted out. So there's a large rivet here that holds this, and you can see it's just a bit sticky in its action. And I think a tiny drop of oil there might be the thing to try. So I usually get a drop on a toothpick, apply that, just a tiny drop, and then work this. And I'm looking at the way it moves and feeling the way it moves too. Now use a cotton bud to mop up any excess oil there, because obviously what I've put in there is more than enough and has certainly made that action move very well. The plastic window on the meter is very delicate, very easily damaged. I'm not going to attempt to clean the inside surface of that. It looks pretty good, and unless you have a burning desire to get into a lot of trouble, you're better to leave that surface alone. It's not easy to polish should you decide that you've scuffed it in the cleaning process, and it is very easily damaged. So I'll just tighten those two screws back up. Our cover's in place. That arm tracks nicely. With a tiny bit of naphtha, being careful not to splash it about. I want to clean the top surface of this meter and around the spindle in the centre, and clean this cam plate that runs on it. I'll clean top and bottom surfaces of that. It all looks good. That's in good order. I'll put a little wipe of molybdenum around the centre where it runs on the boss, and I'll run some molybdenum around this surface here where it contacts that arm and swings the follower needle. So I can swing out the follower needle to allow it to drop into that slot, and I'm checking the action of the follower needle to make sure there's no stickiness there, that it tracks the cam smoothly. And we have our circlip here, which I did just rediscover. Now it's stuck to the bottom of the meter. Well, it would be because of the magnet. And I'll put that circlip back in place. So that's all good. Now I want to clean the top surface of that meter window, and I'll do that with a little bit of glass cleaner on a cotton bud. You have to be pretty gentle doing this. That plastic scratches easily. And all I'm wanting to do, I can see that cotton bud's come off quite dirty, so there's a lot of just dust and general dirt there. It's gone now. That's good. So there's our meter ready to go back on the camera. We can put our shutter release, our film release, and the shutter button, they can go back on the camera. The spring, we've got springs here somewhere. If I can find the right container. I'm looking for 2 coil springs. Here they are. Now I'll just rub a tiny bit of molybdenum down the shutter release button hole, just a tiny amount, and I'll do the same for the centre of the film release button shaft. Here's our shutter release. Let's just give that a wipe with a bit of molybdenum for good measure. The shutter release has the shorter of the 2 springs. That pops in there. Our film release button has the longer of the 2 springs, and that pops on up there. Now the meter has to sit on the camera. And and it sits there. There's a single screw that holds that meter in position, and it was a long screw. It's not the same as any other on the camera, and shouldn't be easily mixed up. Checking that those two buttons can move smoothly. I'll do that screw up. I won't over tighten it because that plastic is very brittle on the meter, and in fact it's normally broken. It's extremely unusual to find one that's still intact. There we have it. I'm just checking that my viewfinder is clean. I haven't put any fingerprints on that. The top of the camera, that's waiting for the top of the camera now, and we'll look at the top of the camera. I haven't cleaned this yet. It obviously needs a bit of a clean. It's generally in quite reasonable order. Some corrosion visible along this top edge here. Mostly, it's hard to say. Not sure why that should be there particularly. Perhaps somebody was holding the camera once and they had something corrosive on their hands, salt water, something of that nature, and it's just etched into that point. The rest of the top looks to be in quite good order. It's a bit dusty and dirty. I've got to clean the meter viewing window inside and out, and our eyepiece for the viewfinder inside and out. Check that the frame counter revolves smoothly. It's not jammed up with dust or dirt. That all looks good. But generally I just need to give this a wipe over with a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud to remove dirt, dust, finger grease, bring a bit of sparkle back to that chrome. I'll only fit this back temporarily because I need to adjust the film release action on the camera so that the film release, the release that lets you move the film advance so that you can wind on to the next frame, is triggered at exactly the same point as the shutter fires. That's the ideal, and we want to achieve that if we possibly can. And it's completely unadjusted at the moment because we had that film release shaft out. That's good. Let me clean these glass surfaces. Well, the meter window isn't glass, that's plastic. Very cautious about cleaning that. The outer piece is likely to be the dirtiest and dustiest, and it certainly is. And the action here is more a case of using the glass cleaner to wet the Q-tip to lift off that dust and then just give it a quick wipe dry. There's no future in thinking you're going to polish that window shiny if it'll suffered over the years from dust and fingers and all the rest of it, and that surface is probably anything but pristine. All you can really do is get the dirt off it and hope for the best. The viewfinder window here is very clean. We know someone had been in the camera to poach the prism out of it. It's very likely that they cleaned it at the time. Right, so I'm just going to hold the top cover on, advance the film, and and I'm pressing the shutter release very slowly. And I'm listening to see if I hear the film release go before the shutter fires. Well, it seems to me they're going at very much the same point. That's just ideal, and it's not normally the case. That was the film release. So the film release fired before the shutter. I'll just try and judge that again. That's ideal. You really do want that to happen, but it's got to be very slightly before the shutter goes, so you don't release it accidentally when you're almost ready to take a shot and then change your mind. Yeah, so there is a certain difference there. The film releases before the shutter, so I'm just going to screw in the screw on the top of the film release shaft very slightly, and I think if I can just about get down here I can. That was probably less than a quarter of a turn, and I'll pop this all back in place and try again. None of this is a problem if you're a heavy-handed bugger like me, and when you press the shutter release you press it all the way down firmly. But if you... yeah, that's the film release going first. If you follow best practice and you squeeze the shutter very gently until the shutter fires, and then you release the shutter button, you may well find that you don't release the film release button at the same time if there is any difference in the adjustment. The best compromise usually is that the film releases slightly before the shutter. Oh, that must have been pretty close. It's still releasing the film before it gets to the shutter release. And I'm checking that that's consistent, that I'm not imagining things, or that there's nothing sticky causing it to work differently sometimes. That one didn't release the film release, but it had released the shutter, so I've gone slightly too far. Yeah, that's exactly what I've done. I've just gone slightly too far, so I've just got to raise the screw on the top of that film release shaft very slightly, and we're probably talking an eighth of a turn, something like that. Can't quite get to that easily. I'm going to remove the meter again so I can see that. Button clearly. So it's quite a... that'll do, mate. Before I close up the top of the camera, what am I going to do here? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll lock this gear on the top of the shaft with a little drop of lacquer. And it only takes a little drop. Just take off any excess there. That's good. As these parts were lubricated when they went together. I'll just put a tiny extra smear of grease there. And we'll pop our meter back in place. Screw that down, check the action of the buttons, they're good. Make sure I didn't put any fingerprints on top of the meter, and I didn't. Put the top cover back in place, check the film advance action and release once more. Now I need to come up slightly more again. There are 2 clicks. When the film release works, there are 2 clicks, and I'm hearing the first click but not the quieter second click. There's a bit of toing and froing with this game, as you can see. So I should hear that solid first click, and I'm getting that, but I'm not getting the second click. Now that seems good, I'm happy with that. And put my top cover in place, or put the screws for the top cover in place I should say. Put this one here goes onto the post. Sometimes it's a bit hard to get lined up. No, that's good now. And we'll spin that up tight shortly, but first I want to get the other screws in place on the top cover. Got 2 at this end, countersunk, chrome brass, easily damaged. These ones are in pretty good order, they're marked, you can see somebody's put them in and they've used a too small a screwdriver. So it's not the end of the world, then it's not obvious. And they are a long way from ugly. One at the end of the top cover here. That's our top cover in place. I'll run down this screw, this pin-headed screw. That's very good. Our rewind button can go on. Now that collar, that's a bit ugly. I'll see if I can find another one.